be easy. Prepare yourself. Here they come.
George, Milla, Paul, I'm very happy to talk to you guys today about In the Lost Lands. My name is Therese Laxon from Collider. And just to kick this off, Paul, I went through the production notes, and I know that you optioned 3 stories from George long before Game of Thrones was even in the picture. What can you tell me about the other 2 stories that you optioned, and what was it about In the Lost Lands that you felt made it the most cinematic?
Well, actually, it wasn't myself who optioned the stories. It was my producing partner and the writer of the movie, Konstantin Werner, who's sitting over there. He originally optioned the stories from George, I think we were saying like 17 years ago.
A long time ago.
So yeah, 2008. He optioned 3 stories, Lost Lands, The Lonely Songs of Larendor, and Bitter Blooms. And originally, Milla was approached by Konstantin with an idea to make a movie where the 3 stories were combined. And Milla was a huge fan of George's. Like, Milla reads an immense amount of literature, and especially fantasy. So she was very keen to do something based on George's work. But that iteration of the movie never took off, as often happens in the film world. And a couple of years later, I think the option rights were about to lapse. And Konstantin and Milla talked, and Milla suggested that Konstantin talk to me about it. I became involved. And then at the behest of Milla, we wrote a different screenplay, one that just concentrated on one of the stories, which was In the Lost Lands. Because we felt like that, out of the 3, should be the first one out of the gate.
Well, especially for a vehicle, for me, specifically, it felt like the strongest story to begin your entrance into the Lost Lands' universe. And it felt like the easiest story to kind of adapt, because intrinsically it's a love story, and it's a very simple story, but not at all simple. It's very
It's got its twists and turns.
It's got its twists and turns, and but in the end, it is a beautiful love story, and that's what really drew me to it.
The 3 stories that Konstantin optioned, they were all written for me, but they really have nothing to do with each other. They're like in different universes. Bitter Blooms is a science fiction story set in my science fiction future history that I call The Thousand Worlds. The other 2 are fantasy stories, both actually. Supposedly the first of the series when I thought of them. I never wrote the second story in either series, but yeah, I wanted to. I had in the back of my head that the Grey Alys could have a whole series of adventures with people coming to her and buying things, and it not turning out necessarily well for them.
Yeah, I mean, it also feels like, in some sense, Bitter Blooms and those 3 stories had no connection, but somehow they all fit into your universe because you do have such incredible ability to build these worlds, and who knows if it's the same time period, or maybe it's far flung in the future or far flung into the past. But
I wrote all these stories in the 70s and 80s, so forgive me if I don't remember clearly, but they all feature women in the leading role.
yes.
And
They all have star-crossed lovers. That's why
star-crossed lovers, that's
every
right.
single one is a man and a woman who meet, and then destiny pulls them apart.
But I remember them vividly. Larendor began with the sentence, "There is a girl who goes between the worlds." One of my favorite opening sentences that I ever found. And she does. She goes between the worlds searching for a lost lover who she didn't find in that first story. But I
have to say, for me, when I was preparing the character of Grey Alys, I was reading the other stories to kind of go, was that Grey Alys? Like, are these all the worlds that she went through to get here? Like, it was very inspiring.
She's had a long life too, so
well, she's a mythical creature. I mean, it's like when you read Greek mythology and you go, oh, the spirit of the river and you go, wow, that's like that poor spirit has been sitting in that river for millennia, and hardly anyone ever passes by. They must be pretty lonely. It's always very tragic.
Well, that's what the story.
The price of immortality, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Be
just
careful
to
what you wish
speak on
for.
that, Grey Alys, I mean, it's kind of described that she's like cursed with the curse of having to fulfill people's wishes. And when I was reading the short story, I felt like she was a sort of enigmatic character, and it was kind of hard to read some of her emotions. But in the film, she is a very, like, through your performance, she is a very emotional character where I can definitely feel what's in her soul. And what was it like developing that character and kind of getting into it and getting into that sort of aspect of her?
It was really interesting because for me, there were so many questions about Grey Alys. Where does she come from? What is her her motivation really? What is this curse? When did it begin? Did she have a childhood? Does she remember her parents? Like, there's all these like logistical, like normal things that I was trying to figure out how to answer. And, it really felt like there was a part of me that felt like maybe the answers are sort of in the questions. Like, you don't ever expect mythology to make sense. You don't read Greek myths or Grimm's fairy tales and expect that it's going to be like, this is how things work technically. It's magic, it's imagination. There has to be some faith going into it. So I feel like, funnily enough, after we made the movie, a lot of my questions were answered because I feel like in some really strange way, Grey Alys managed to outsmart her curse. Like, everything in the end worked to her benefit more than other people's.
That's definitely true.
So be careful what you wish for, because Grey Alys might just take it, might just be like, oh, this is going to help me.
I mean, speaking about that sort of faith that you have in the character, George, you're no stranger to adaptations of your work. For you, what is a green flag and what is a red flag when it comes to working with people who want to adapt your stories? And what was it about Paul that made you say, okay, yes, I trust you with this?
Well,
Don't make him cry.
it was actually Konstantin who first contacted me and bought the 3 stories, and he wrote a screenplay with all 3 of them in it that I remember meeting with him a couple of times, and he would apprise me of the progress. He was taking it to film festivals and so forth. I don't remember how many years passed before you got involved, and he told me that you only going to focus on one of the stories.
We
that was
tried
that.
to get it made for like a good year. We tried to get it made.
I think Paul came in 2017.
Yeah, a couple of years later.
You've asked a very big question, and one that I've been blogging about and getting in trouble for. A writer, in some ways, is the hardest one to say about this, because I once wrote a story called Portraits of His Children, which was about a writer and being haunted by his fictional characters. But I don't have any children, and I think a lot of writers, these are my children, these stories that I create. And you have 2 choices when you sell them for adaptations. You can try to get involved, or you can just, all right, I wrote the book. Here's they're making a movie. It's a different thing. And sometimes it's good to do one, and sometimes it's good to do the other. James M. Cain, very famous writer of the 30s, he wrote The Postman Always Lived Twice and all that, was very famously asked by a reporter not unlike you, as to, what do you think of what Hollywood has done to your books? And he answered very famously, Hollywood hasn't done anything to my books. They're right there. They're on the shelf. Not a word's been changed. And that is the answer that you give sometimes. But there's also something very special for a writer if you sell your book to a movie. And maybe you're involved with the movie, maybe you're not. Maybe you don't see any of it until opening day. But when you see it on opening day, if it's good, and if it's good in the way that you wrote it, it's like your dreams have come alive. These children of yours, these fictional children, there they are on the screen, and it really is. I can't describe how great a feeling that is. How exciting it is.
I can relate to that so much because I have children of my own, and it's so interesting that you would compare it that way because, in a sense, like you write the book of your children when they're born, and you have this idea of how you're going to parent, and you do your best to raise them up until they're 18 or whatever, and then you have to let them go. And then the integrity that you've put into them all those years then comes back tenfold to you because, in a sense, the life they take on their own gives you pride.
Hopefully,
Hopefully. If Paul didn't give you pride, poof, I'll get him for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I respect that, and I've listened to a lot of your interviews in the past few weeks, and I think that's a very fair answer to give, especially because sometimes you can control things and sometimes you can't, and you really just have to, I think at some point you do have to go with the flow and say, we're going to let this be what it is.
Yes, but of course I gave you everything in this world has an upside and downside. There's also the downside where you watch the movie and God, it's not your children. They've done something, and there are many cases. I know writers who have gone to the premiere of their movie and gotten up and walked out. They just can't take it. So because there is such a strong personal relationship there. It's also a very good feeling, of course, which in my arrogance I will say doesn't happen that often. But when they make substantial changes. And it's better. It's better. I mean, I did a whole blog on House of Dragon first season. The character of Viserys Targaryen, he's a very minor character in my book, but they got Petty Constantine to play him, and he was robbed. He should have won an Emmy. It was amazing, amazing. And his Viserys is so much better than my Viserys. It made me want to go back and rewrite the book, but I didn't. But that can happen too. So. This is really a profession for gamblers, wouldn't you say? You never know how it's going to turn out.
I say it sounds like a roll of the dice, so.
Yeah.
And so just to switch a little bit and focus on some of these wild action scenes in this film, there's one specifically, Paul, that I want to talk about, which is a school bus cable car fight in like sort of the middle of the air. And I want to talk about what it takes to film a spectacle like that, specifically since I know you guys used a lot of Unreal Engine in producing some of these like special effects.
That was a scene that we ended up shooting pretty much for the whole length of the movie. We kept coming back to it because the school bus, as you said, is kind of hanging in the air. And it starts in a railway station. Then it kind of goes out like a cable car. It goes on these cables and it goes over this vast chasm. Then one cable gets cut and the car swings through 90 degrees. So of course we had to shoot everything in the railway station first, then everything kind of over the chasm second, then everything where the cable car had swung through 90 next. Then both cables get cut and the car ends up hanging. So we had to keep rearranging the geography and the physics of the school bus. So we ended up kind of coming back,
Every few weeks.
Every few weeks we'd have the bus arranged in a different way. And now you're climbing up the bus. Now the roof of the bus is the floor of the bus. I mean, it was a very complicated scene.
And that's where Paul comes super in handy because, I think for actors, you're so much in the moment. And so I always depend on Paul and I go, okay, what just happened and where did we just come from and where are we going? Because it's been like a few weeks since we shot this scene and I can't remember. And it's so important. And by the way, you'd be surprised how many directors don't keep track of this. And I think it's so special. Paul does this, and there's a handful of people I've worked with that are very, very organized with keeping track of where we are in the script. And Paul was always able to go, remember a couple of weeks ago, this is what you did, boom, boom, boom. You fought here, and now the cable car has gone down. Now you've just caught it with your sides. Boom, that's what we're shooting. I'm like, oh yeah.
There's a lot of sequences to remember.
Yeah,
in that
yeah,
fight scene
no,
too.
it's
Like now that you mention it, it's like, okay, that's a lot to.
It's very
to process.
scientific in
Yeah.
that sense, you know. I mean, it's obviously a product of passion and expression and art, but then the logistics are really overwhelming.
Yeah, it's not something you do on the spur of the moment. You know, there was a lot of planning.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, you know, specifically Milla working with Dave on this film, you guys have like this great, I mean, a lot of the time on screen is you and Dave working together. And I'm curious, how is it sort of formulating that relationship together on screen and building that rapport? And, you know, as both of you are pretty fantastic action stars, I wondered if you guys traded any tips when it came to being on screen.
You know, we felt so lucky to get Dave after seeing him in Blade Runner. We were like, we want Dave. I mean, he's just perfect for this. And then Paul had many talks with him and they got along really well. And he finally signed on to the picture. And, you know, the thing that really struck me when I met him was how relieved I was that this is like a nice, normal human that we're working with and isn't like some egotistical movie star hoodly doodly. It's going to bring a bunch of baggage and entourage and stuff on set that's just going to complicate things. You know, when you make a movie of this scale and there's so many details and it's already so challenging, the last thing you need is a bunch of egos on set making things more difficult. So, you know, the fact that Dave came in and really, you know, became part of a family and was so sweet and so kind and so open to suggestion, open to us trying new things, improvising, taking risks. He always made everyone feel like there was a safe space around him. And I think that's, for me, one of the most important elements of working with actors is feeling safe around them, feeling like you can take risks, feeling accepted, embraced, and seen, and heard, and respected, you know?
Yeah, I've interviewed Dave a couple times before, and he's such a delight to speak to, and I can't imagine like being on set with him, like having all that time.
He's wonderful to work with. I mean, really, I mean, having both him and Milla on the same set was a dream for me as a director, especially when you're doing logistically very complicated things like the school bus, you know, where it can't be just all about the actors. Some of it, unfortunately, has to be about the logistics of like turning things upside down and like not having, and there wasn't enough dolly track in Poland for us to go all the way around the school bus. And also we'd have to make all the lights move. And so the director of photography came up with the idea, well, we're supposed to be circling around the school bus, but what happens if the camera stays stationary and the school bus goes round and round? And we're like, okay, well, that would look exactly the same, but it means all the actors have to be on board for everything is changing, everything's going round. It's like, which way am I looking? You know, there was a big technical aspect to making this movie that Milla and Dave were very helpful with and very accommodating. You know, they really made it easy for me.
We're like, whatever, just tell us where we got to be and what we got to do and which way you're turning. We'll be there.
I mean, that's good to hear. Sometimes, you know, it doesn't go like that all the time.
I'm not getting on that school bus.
And then, Paul, you know, expanding this world, obviously the story, it is a short story, so there is a lot to sort of bring into and extend. And I noticed that, you've included like a map in the film, and there's a lot of new elements. What was it like extending those elements? And did you work with George? Did you talk with Constantine, who is sitting over there? What was that process like?
Well, the process started obviously with Konstantin Werner, who, optioned the stories, talked to Milla. Milla introduced the two of us. And then when we decided to focus on just the Lost Lands, Konstantin wrote a new screenplay, and I was very involved in that as well. And then Milla was very involved. So we'd take Milla a draft of the screenplay, and she would give us her notes. And quite often the notes would be, Milla was very, very concerned that we stayed true to what George had written. We stayed true to the characters that were at the heart of George's story. Because George's story is really about the relationship between Boyce and Grey Alys, and this wonderful twist at the end. But it's about those two characters.
Keep it tight, keep it.
And quite often, because we were building out the world, we'd go too far in one direction.
Distracting.
And Milla would go, amazing action, but where are the characters? You've kind of lost sight of the characters and their story.
Why are we following these people?
Yeah.
Like
So
the
she
story's
kind of,
about Boyce and Alice.
she'd beat Konstantin and I around the head with the screenplay and say, go back. So we do another draft and we get some more notes. Then we do another draft. And finally, Milla will go, okay, now we need to show it to George. We need to get his opinion on it. And then, because I was very aware I'm building out a short story, but I wanted George to be happy with it. So we sent him scripts. George would make comments. We also met in LA, and I showed George the production design artwork.
It's beautiful stuff.
Where he was aware of the world that we were building, because, I'm very aware that kind of Westeros is out there, and we don't want to just be Westeros adjacent. We want to really expand the George R.R. Martin universe in a very distinct way. But I wanted George to be on board with those visuals.
The one thing we didn't have is dragons.
Well, maybe if George writes the sequel, maybe a dragon walks into your shop.
Always wanted to bond with a dragon.
You could have like a
Ride a
werewolf.
dragon, do you? Ah.
Bond. Feel one with the dragon.
And George, what was your?
And burn your enemies. That's good too.
That helps. I don't have many enemies, by the way. I'm a pretty chill person. I might have a couple of people that aren't on my good side, but
You can threaten.
they
not
don't
burn.
need to be burned by dragon fire. Not yet, anyway.
No, it's always the process as described is the process for many films. The original author, my position in regard to this is not always involved. Sometimes they just we're buying your book and here's your check, and see you at the premiere if you even get an invitation. But it's nice when they do involve you, and even more when you have the feeling that they listen and have a understanding of the original material, because many times they don't. I'm not talking about anybody that I'm involved with here, so please don't turn it around to some current project. But I'm a science fiction fan. I grew up reading science fiction, comic books, a big comic book fan, and I love these characters. I love some of these stories, and there wasn't many science fiction films that were adaptations being made back in the 50s and the 60s when I was growing up. They were films, but they were like original films about, giant spiders and other things that someone invented. But you didn't see Robert A. Heinlein stories. You didn't see Isaac Asimov stories. The great writers who made me love science fiction. I grew up. And when they finally got around and they started making some of those, it was very hard because, it might have had Asimov's name on it, but this wasn't the way Isaac would have written it. It was not at all, and that was not good. I think when you're adapting, if you respect the original material, you should try to stay as close to it as possible. And if there's a reason for change, and many times there are reasons for change, a lot of them are budgetary or they're practical concerns of what you can do, what you can't do. Make changes for good reasons. I was just in England. I came back just yesterday, and I visited the Charles Dickens house. I think Dickens probably has more of his work adapted to television film than any other author that I can think of. I don't,
And the Christmas Carol alone probably has.
And Christmas Carol, yeah, I think Christmas Carol has been adapted more times than any other work of English literature. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
The BBC has a lot of like free, free content out there.
And boy, they're different. Some of them are great. The Alistair Sim Christmas Carol, I think is the greatest. But some of the other George C. Scott Christmas Carol is good. The Bill Murray Scrooged is crazily different, but oddly faithful in the same time. But there are also some that, why did you make this? If you didn't like the story, stop it. But I don't know. I'm rambling here. Sorry.
No, but what I think for Paul and I was really impressive was that working with you come from a background that has experience in Hollywood. You've been a showrunner. You've gone through the gamut of the system. So you came into it with intrinsic understanding of how the system works. So, you work sometimes with book writers that have no concept of what a Hollywood movie or a TV show needs.
Right.
And so they get very precious and they just don't understand. There's certain things that we can't read people's minds. We have to show it visually. I mean, there's simple things where you have this understanding of what it takes. And that was so helpful for us to have someone on the team that understood what it is to be a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to wrap up because I don't have all the time in the world. Specifically, I have a question about the film, and I'm not going to get into too many spoilers because it concerns the end. But Paul, I'm curious because the end of this film is not, it doesn't go that closely to the short story's ending, which is, I would say, quite tragic and almost kind of depressing. What was the decision to change up the tone of that ending and give it something where you have a little bit more hope?
Well, we do end. Well, the movie does have the original ending of the story, but then it goes on a little bit further because I think sometimes what works on the written page, if you have that experience in the movie theater, that's not going to be the best experience. It kind of works. It works in your home when you're reading it by yourself. When you're sitting watching it and you've been through this emotional journey with these characters, and then it suddenly ends. You don't want to send the audience out unsatisfied.
Everybody dies.
You don't want to.
Wait a minute, that's how I always end.
So that we wanted to give kind of an element of hope at the end, which for me, as Milla said, it's almost like Grey Alys works the system a little bit. She's finally found how to outwit her curse. And maybe for some people, they actually do get what they wish for. They have to pay a terrible price for it. Of course, it's George R.R. Martin. You'd expect no less. But the terrible price is paid, and some people get what they want. And that is a new ending that we added. And to be honest, that was something that developed during the making of the movie. And because George had read the earlier drafts, he hadn't seen that ending. So when I came to show George the movie a few months ago, I'm sitting in the theater with George, in the very theater that we're going to be in tonight. And I suddenly realize I haven't told him that there's a new ending. And I got really, really nervous. I have to say, it's the most nervous I've ever been in a movie theater.
He didn't tell me this.
And
I would have been like, you what?
And
This is George R.R. Martin.
I should have told him. I was busy. I don't know. I got distracted.
I thought I could trust you.
And so the lights go up at the end, and I'm the most stressed I've ever been. And George turns around and he looks at me, and George has really, really good comic timing, and he stares at me, and there's this long beat, and then he goes, "I loved it." And that was, so I went from being the most stressed I've ever been in the theater to probably the happiest I've ever been in the
Cold
theater.
sweats came in.
Yeah.
With the face of thunder. He turned to you with the face of thunder. Leaned over, took a pause. I loved it. Paul was like, oh.
It's an interesting question, larger than our little movie about the endings of stories and how stories should end. I wrestle with some of that a lot on a lot of my stories, and you know the Greeks and the Romans, they love tragedies. I'm not sure Americans share that taste for tragedy.
I love a tragedy, so.
There.
Well, they've always been, hopeful. It's a young nation, They don't have the experience of the Russians.
Where everything will eventually go wrong. Even if it goes good for a while, it's going to go wrong.
When I bought this theater, the Jean Cocteau, it had been closed off for 7 years. So I bought it and reopened it, and we refurbished it a little and all that. But then I'm trying to get movies to fill it, and of course, this is a tiny little independent theater. We weren't getting any of the big movies, the big Hollywood movies. Go away, we're not going to give any of that to you. So we're getting smaller independent movies and also older movies. And I had the bright idea, from my own childhood. Well, let's show some old kid movies, and we'll have a Saturday night children's matinee, and the kids will get in free. Their parents will have to pay. We'll get money that way. The kids will get in free, and we'll show them these old movies that some are in the public domain, or you can get them cheap. And everybody thought that was a great idea, so I did that. And then, unfortunately, I began with one of my own favorite little boyhood things, Old Yeller. And
That's a good one. Let's just go kill ourselves straight after.
And I didn't attend the screening myself, but I came by at the end to see how the kids had liked it. And I was treated to set of, like 30 kids coming out of the theater weeping.
And then the never-ending story, the Dark Crystal.
What the hell?
Classic.
These kids,
I was going to say those ticket money went to future therapy sessions.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes.
I just say,
destroyed my life.
no, that's not.
Last
That's a good
Unicorn.
experience for the kids. Sooner or later, they have to shoot the dog. All life. In all life, sooner or later, you have to shoot the dog, right? No matter how much you love. I don't know.
Listen,
I'm a sick and twisted
I showed the
human
Last
being.
Unicorn to my kids. It's a thing in our family. I'm like, we have to watch The Last Unicorn because that's just like so
Peter
deeply
Beagle.
ingrained.
He's amazing. Have you met him? He's
No, I
wonderful, too.
haven't. I would love to. He's
a
was
wonderful guy.
literally my kind of movie inner soundtrack that was me for ages.
You did a screening with Peter here, right? For the
Several.
Last Unicorn.
Yeah.
I can
he
feel
toured
his body
for The Last
dying
Unicorn.
all around me.
And another great one. I was just down in London, and we went to Cecil Court. You ever been to Cecil Court? Yeah, it's a street that's entirely bookshops, and they have old classic books, and you can find.
It's a money sink, that area.
Yeah, but I found a copy of Watership Down, autographed by the author.
Wow.
Another of my favorite books, and that's a great fantasy too, and it's great in a lot of ways.
Game of Thrones
but
with
the
rabbits.
end is well, yes, kind of, sort of. But the ending, it's sort of a happy ending. They win. They establish Watership Down. The bad guy gets defeated, but at the end, the hero dies because he's old and he's a rabbit, and you see him going up to rabbit heaven, and it's so sad but sweet at the same time.
Okay, well, on that slightly depressing note,
Watching The Lost Lands.
it's so fitting. I want to thank you guys for your time and being so generous with your answers. Everybody go see this movie. It is quite a ride, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Constantine.